Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce Nathan Roberson. Nathan works to advance diverse research methods to support teaching and learning in support of holistic educational research. His research focuses on social indicators of well-being and the creation of innovative metrics to inform public policy. He's passionate about philosophy and educational activism. Nathan has a PhD in measurement, evaluation, and research methodology from the University of British Columbia. He was also a policy analyst on the OECD Education 2030 project, where he worked to advance country-level policy to implement 21st century competencies into national-level curriculum reform. As the Chief Research Officer at Beyond Education, he is developing research on 21st century competencies, which are critical to the future of education, employment, and human flourishing. Over to you, Nathan.
Thank you, Shahab. So I'll also just add a bit more to my bio to say that I've worked in education actually my whole life. So both as an educator teaching statistics at the university level, and then also working with the K-12 education systems as well, and teaching Spanish in the US education system. So education has been my entire professional career, and I'm very excited to get to continue that and continue this journey with you all. So we will dive in. So Beyond Education, to help set the scene for who we are and what we're doing. So we often talk about that we're living in this uncertain world with consistent change. So I think this is now familiar language to all of us in this age of AI. We're anticipating changes both to our educational systems, but broadly to our society. And so what does that mean for us as educators? What does that mean for us as a society? Is that as we anticipate a future, that we need to actually anticipate one that's flexible and adaptable. That we don't necessarily know everything that we need, but instead we know what is it we need to be able to adapt to that uncertain or new future. So that's what we're trying to do at Beyond Education by measuring 21st century competencies. So we believe that 21st century competencies are those skills, character traits, and meta-learning attributes that enable us to do that in the future. So just to reinforce this, the kind of economic metrics that we've seen, then so we know from workforce measures that indeed the professional sector is demanding more of 21st century competency skills, and that these are the types of things that we need to continue to support for our students and our educational systems to adapt to this changing world. Just a quick graphic to kind of drive home this point. Thinking about the Industrial Revolution, we saw a real drive and increase in technology. And so we saw actually that the technology was then ahead of our educational systems. And so we saw this mass increase in technology, and this led to a mass schooling program. And this is essentially our current schooling programs that we often see today, is that we bring large amounts of students into a schooling program that was designed essentially to meet an industrial model of education. But now we're in another period of mass change, so of digital revolution. And so this demands that we now meet this new changing circumstances with mass sophistication of our educational systems. And so that's not to say that, so that's to say that sophistication needs to be adaptable and situated to the different local contexts in which we're living and working. An analogy that we often like to think about is that education in the past was kind of this map that you're all familiar with, which is to say if you wanted to go one place, you looked at the map and you knew exactly which roads and which places to turn right here, turn left here, and it was a very clear path of education. But in fact, that's not the educational system anymore. Rather, we say that you need a kind of compass, which is to say, okay, it's not a left or right situation, it's a veer north or a veer east. And that directional situation is going to be different for each of us depending on where we are in the globe. So it's not that everybody turns left if you're in France versus if you're in Chile and you're going north, you're going to have to adapt differently. So that's the context in which we're working in. So our philosophy, our theoretical framework is based upon the four-dimensional model from the Center for Curriculum Redesign at Harvard. So this is based on kind of decades of research around what are 21st century competencies. And so settling on the 12 competencies that you see here in this wheel. So the 12 competencies are broken into the 3 dimensions, as I mentioned already. So skills, character, and meta learning. And then all of that is situated in this larger 4 dimensions of education. So those being knowledge, this is the traditional skills that we're familiar with, mathematics, literacy, science type of things. And then the skills, character, and meta learning. So schools already do the knowledge dimension quite well, I would say. Of course, there's room for growth in these different dimensions, but now the burden on us is to supplement these other dimensions. So of course, skills, character, meta learning in some way are already taught in schools in some ways, but often it's implicitly taught. And our mandate, our call to action, so to speak, is that we explicitly teach these things. So we know that these are what we could say mutable competencies, meaning they can be taught and they can be changed, and that it's worth the effort to intentionally try to teach these competencies. So where is it that we're working? So I'm here, this is Research Unplugged. I'm talking to you from a research perspective. That is my background as an educational researcher. But as you also heard for Shahab mention as well, that I'm also interested in the policy context. How do we lead to curriculum change at our national levels? And more importantly, as an educator myself, I'm interested in the real world implementation. So, and so how do we span and go back and forth these different levels? So that's something I attempt to do at Beyond Education, is move between these different levels. So I welcome that as an element of conversation here today, that we can go back and forth between these various dimensions. So research, real world implementation, and policy change. So our solution, who are we at Beyond Education? So you have a basis of our theoretical model already. We provide essentially an assessment of 21st century competencies. That's kind of our foot in the door, we'd say, with educational groups, educational stakeholders, but in fact, we're trying to do much more. So, and consistent with the previous slide I mentioned, we're also trying to support professional development, leading to curriculum change, and that's essentially trying to lead to a small P policy change within schools, ultimately leading to a large P policy change at municipalities or perhaps national levels one day. So how is the assessment developed at Beyond Education? So each of the competencies that I mentioned is also broken into sub-competencies. So it's really the sub-competencies where you can actually start to think about them coming alive. So curiosity here. We all have a sense of curiosity, but let's try to make it actionable. So willingness to understand topics in depth, and then openness to novelty and to try new things. And so then it's really at the sub-competency level that we can start to design and think about assessment questions or assessment problems, as well as professional development to actually enact the competency support. So our assessment, so my background, as Shahab mentioned, is in measurement, evaluation, and research methodology. So I'm a psychometrician by training. So that's to say I'm thinking quite regularly about these psychometric properties of our assessment. When students take the assessment, is it reliable? Meaning to say it's the same pattern of taking of results if students have the same attributes? Is it sensitive to change when teachers are implementing specific programs to try to change curiosity? Do we actually detect that with our instrument? These types of questions. So that's what I'm doing. And then the validity here, we strive very hard. So CCR, of course, is already a large think tank, but we aim to connect our approach to international models of education. So the OECD, IB, CASL, those types of theoretical frameworks as well that we attach. Here's some of our papers here that are published. We have a couple other that are not on this slide, but that's to say that we're also trying to remain active in the research scientific community. So that's part of what we're doing. And then the students, so how does this actually look in the school? So the students take this assessment and they receive an individualized report of their 12 competencies. So that's to say what, and they've given the definition of the competency, what is their developmental level of the competency, and then some generalized approaches for how they might work to develop those competencies. So that's at the student level. And then the class and school levels also receive additional reports. So this is where we start to make connections to what are the patterns across the students. And this is to help inform the teachers or the school about different curriculum interventions they might be able to make. So if we see that females are doing really well in courage and the males are lower, well, maybe we need to design a specific intervention to help the males to equalize those a little bit. So it helps to provide indicators for where we might be able to design these tailored curriculum approaches to develop the 21st century competencies. So all of this kind of together is contributing to meeting the sustainable development goals that we're all familiar with of quality education for all relevant skills for decent work and education for sustainable development and global citizenship. So that's the large scale trend that I'm introducing you to here. And then now to start to get into more concrete research findings. So since this is a research talk, so we've now working with we're in thousands of schools in 12 countries around the world. We've administered our assessment to over 300,000 students and in 3 languages, so those languages being Portuguese, Spanish, and English. And so it's really at this point that as we continue to grow and expand, that now we're expanding our research database and the sense of how can we make more informed findings and how can these findings continue to feed back into both the research, but of course then the change for the teachers and the policy. So well, you're all reading them here. So we're often working with clients in diverse contexts who have their own diverse questions themselves. So in that sense, for the real life implementation, we're wanting to connect our research to the needs of the partners we're working with. So oftentimes that means we're connecting academic data or behavioral data that the schools have that there is a priority for them. And then we connect that with our competencies to start to make inquiries into the way in which certain competencies are related to their programs. So I'll mention a different Portuguese partner that we worked with. They provide a leadership program. And so one of the things that they saw is, well, actually only half of their students participated in this leadership program, the others didn't. So then we're connecting this kind of workshop experience that the students had to our data. And indeed, we see the confirmatory evidence that the leadership competency that we measure, well, the students who participated in the leadership program are scoring higher in leadership than the others. So this is confirmatory evidence for the clients, which is then used for them to justify or to warrant changing the program in order to insist that all the students participate in the leadership, because indeed there's evidence to prove or to suggest that it's worth the experience. So it's those types of findings that help us lead to that change. I'm going to speak, time check here. Okay, I'm going to speak about a specific study that I also did with some Portuguese partners, looking at structural equation modeling around academic outcomes. So there has been, or rather, well, we know that 21st century competencies are related and predicted of academic outcomes, that the two are associated with one another, right? So a student who has high levels of creativity or critical thinking is also likely to do well in literacy or science, those types of things. And so while this has, let's say, is taken for granted evidence in the field of education and curriculum studies, what we don't do frequently and are only just beginning to do as a field is really understand which competencies and in which subjects. Because indeed, 12 competencies is a lot and an already overworked teaching workforce. So it's to say that actually we can start to be more strategic and think about where we can teach which competencies in specific subjects and link the two and not put overburden teachers or educators of these types of things. So this was part of the study that we did here in Portugal. So this was 250 students in grade 6, 7, 9 in an IB school in Portugal, and we were looking at math, science, and English outcomes. So here's just some of the psychometric properties of the assessment that we were looking at there in Portugal. So breaking down our assessment, looking at the skills, character, and meta learning dimensions. So we're seeing that we have good levels of the reliability as well as the sensitivity measures. And the validity argument is more related to the CCR theoretical model that we have. But I'm not going to get into all of the numbers here, but just to say we're looking at change of a pre-post test type of design and how did that impact the students. And so the main finding summary of the previous line is to say that indeed we're seeing an increase in developmental levels of students on the B assessment, that as they're participating in the program, an IB curriculum more holistic, where actually they're already engaged quite intentionally in developing these types of competencies, that students are growing and advancing in the developmental level. I realized I forgot to mention before, when I say developmental level, we break it down into 5 levels. So beginner, intermediate, advanced, expert, and unknown level at the bottom. And so that those levels are age calibrated. And so the competencies in our scale is adjusted based on the ages, which is to say that broadly you could think about it that one needs higher levels of critical thinking when you're older to be at the higher developmental levels. So we're adjusting for natural maturity and natural human development in our scale. So this is just looking at correlations. And so this already starts to help us think about, well, which competencies and which of the subjects might have the strongest correlations that would warrant additional consideration. So broadly, there actually, we saw consistently positive correlations, significant correlations, and only a few non-significant correlations, which are actually the highlighted ones. And then this is the structural equation model that I was running. I don't know, I know this is supposed to be for everyday people, so I'm not going to spend too much time. Structural equation modeling is simultaneous regression models that you're looking at. The main thing of interest for me as I was, this is pointer work? No. The main thing that I was interested in is really this pathway here, which is to say, is there, as somebody changes, well, it's actually some of these 2 pathways, as somebody changes in their critical thinking, is that related to their academic outcomes? So you come in with a level and you leave with the level, of course, but I'm really interested in that delta. And that's what I wanted to investigate here. Looking at the many different competencies that we have. So it's really this line here that I was most interested in, even if the others are of some interest. And so I'll just jump to those findings. So across the 12 competencies, we see that they're positive statistically correlated with the academic outcomes, and we see that they're most strongly correlated in math and English. And then one thing that this school was particularly interested in was the tenure of the student. So students come and go, they move, as we all do. They wanted to know if students who were in the school longer, who had exposure to this holistic curriculum longer, did that have a difference? And so indeed, we did see that students who were in the IB curriculum longer had higher levels, even controlling for their academic outcomes. So equivalent levels of math, but if I was in the school longer, I would have higher 21st century competencies. So that's, oh, and then there were the four that we saw the strongest levels. So collaboration, communication, leadership, and mindfulness came out in this particular study. And then, so reiterating critical thinking, communication, courage, and resilience, and leadership were those that were consistently predictive of academic outcomes. And then some measures of fit statistics, which I won't get into for this talk here. Well, I'll just also add that there was some question of gender comparison. So male students scored lower in English than females, but were otherwise equivalent, and we didn't see a lot of differences in the competencies. And then I'm just briefly getting close to my time, just mention some other findings that we've seen in our work. So we're also interested, I'm very interested, we as a company are interested in equity questions that are important. So we're looking at other predictors, so socioeconomic indicators. Unfortunately, but not surprising, we see a consistent pattern that higher parental education is related to students' 21st century competency. So that's to say that those from advantaged backgrounds, we're also seeing that same trend in the field of 21st century competencies, just as we see it with academic outcomes as well. So that's to warrant, continue to justify, to continue to put efforts into equity-based supports in our schools, even for 21st century competency development. We saw in a large, this was a large group that we were looking at mainly in Brazil, that we were seeing a decline in the gender gap as students age. So this was also in a group network of schools that did intentional work on the 21st century competencies. So that's a positive finding that we're narrowing the gender gap that we see as the students were getting in the school longer. I'm also, in my free time, trying to understand the ecosystem of 21st century competency development. So which measures that we can see, or other factors related to school or the context of the schools, are most important. So indeed, these types of measures of parental socioeconomic status tend to be some of the most important. Age, of course, is important, but that's expected, as I already mentioned, with natural human development. Here's a graph of the gender equity. So overall, it's a good thing. What we saw here, or what we're seeing here, is that males have more extreme values on the scale, but then females, so it's more dispersed rather than the females where it tends to be more clustered. So that's more homogeneous on the female scale than on the male scale. Don't have clear answers to that yet, but ongoing questions, and maybe you all have those answers for me. I mentioned this already with the Portuguese and Brazil school, but to say that we're seeing evidence of exposure to these curriculums, that the intentional instruction of the competencies matters. So that's important for our work and important justification. So now, Beyond Education, we're a young-ish company, 3-4 years now, and so we're really proud and excited about the data, the research that we've done thus far. And now that we have this large database, large collection of research and evidence, now we're starting to transition a bit, which is to say, how do we really think about translating this evidence into practice and professional development? So that's kind of where we're going now, and spending more time to think about how do we work with schools in those ways. So I mentioned already, well, teachers can't do all of it all of the time. So here's kind of a chart about thinking about where do we embed the competencies in schools. So this is kind of our recommendation, consistent with the CCR model as well, that we can embed them, the different competencies in different places in the school to create that cohesive ecosystem of instruction. So that's there. And then just to lastly end on this aspiration note, which is to say that we are proud and striving to be in this Goldilocks zone that we say. So how do we be robust and rigorous with our research, but also scalable and relevant to teachers? And so this is recalling the graphic I showed you earlier at the beginning, which is to say we are striving to straddle these worlds of research and practice and policy change. So this is the landscape of who we are and what we're doing, and so we welcome further collaboration. And with that, I am going to open it up for questions. And there's my contact.
Any questions in the room? Monica?
Thank you, very interesting. Maybe you said it, but how do you measure these competencies, the 21st century competencies, and how do you control for the quality of this data? Because in field work, it's often an issue, right?
Yeah.
When you collect from so many schools, how do you measure and how do you control for the quality?
Yeah, great question. So part of it I mentioned, but not the rest. So thank you for the opportunity. So I had the graphic where we broke down curiosity, for example. And so it's in that way that we are measuring the competencies. By breaking down the competencies to sub-competencies, we can then ask questions that are specifically related to that. So our assessment consists of 3 types of questions. So self-reflection questions about, personal self-reflection questions, behavioral type questions, what is it that the students are doing, and then situational judgment type questions. So
Like skills that students
yes, and
self-reported.
Self-reported self-reflection, right? Behavioral, yes. Otherwise, the behaviorals are also self-reported as well, but they're not an ideal question. They're more objective in that sense. Then how do we control for quality? So embedded within the tool is a social desirability scale. So that's a measure, it's a standard used social desirability measure that if a student is consciously or unconsciously misrepresenting, desiring to appear positive, then we're able to control for that in our analysis. So that student would still receive their individualized report because we believe that all the students should receive that report. But if a student is overexpressing social desirability, we would remove them from the school level analysis. So we are looking at patterns of student response behavior in that way, as well as, there's some open-ended questions that we also can use for quality as well. But if you have other advice, we're looking.
No, I was thinking more of questions of external validity and like how do you collect the data? Are the teachers responsible for collecting the skills, for example, or do you go to because it's so many participants?
Great. Okay, so thank you. I should have given that context. So it's an online assessment. So we provide training to teachers or schools to give them familiarity with the model of the 4D model from the CCR, and then just some administrative type training of how how the experience works for the students in the school. But otherwise, it's a 30-minute assessment that the students do on their own, and they receive that report. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it's impressive because you were mentioning one of the studies in Brazil with almost 200,000 students, so it must be a lot of teachers to train. How do you?
The training is not that extensive. We're able to link with an API from our server to plug in with the LMS servers of the schools. So that creates a pretty seamless process for the teachers of the school that students can log into their LMS at the school and then have the button there to create the assessment, which seamlessly brings them actually to our side where they take the assessment. So that's how we manage that.
And the teachers, how do you do professional development so that they will apply?
Yeah, so the teachers would receive training from our operations team, and then we have materials. So we have videos and booklets of what they can expect, what questions they might expect from students, what behavior they should do. It's true, we've not done, let's say, rigorous monitoring at scale, but we work with other educational providers that we trust, and the data seems to be okay from this point. But, yeah.
Yes, in most cases, do the students get a grade from it? Like, is it part of, or is it just self-assessment and it does not count for their results?
Yeah, so it's a formative, explicitly a formative assessment. So it's not, our instructions are clear that it's not to be used for a grade in that sense. The students, it is their data, right? So we have some partners that ask the students to then have mentorship conversations where the students would bring their results and have a conversation about setting their own learning plan and what that might look like. But no, it's explicitly not to be used for a grade.
Is it completely private? Like, do the students know that nobody can look at their results or the aggregated data, or do the teachers see the individual results?
Yeah, so this depends. It's generally, so sometimes the schools, depending on the size and anonymization, basically, the school might receive individual data that's anonymized, which is to say, so still protecting the anonymity of the student, but allows them to see patterns in a certain way. But otherwise, yes, the students know, and the students, of course, are allowed to opt out of the research at any point.
And last question, when you give back the individual feedback to students, you said you check for biases in trying to conform to the desirability. Do you give this feedback to people?
No. So we don't tell the schools which students have social desirability bias, those types of things, so in order to protect the students.
But do you tell it to the students?
We don't at this point either. I'm not, should I? I don't think so, but.
Interesting. Maybe you try to conform to them.
My tendency is to say no, because I don't want the assessment to be a judgment, and so even that would be perceived as a judgment that you're exhibiting high social desirability bias. That's not the goal of the assessment, right? But
Don't make it insecure, because I think it's every time, no?
yeah, so oftentimes schools will take it as a pre and post test type of instrument in the academic year. So, right, so if I were to tell them at the beginning of the year, it might change how they responded at the end of the year. My tendency is to, we don't do that, and my tendency is to not do that, but I'll think about it more for this.
Yes, thanks a lot for the very insightful approach and analysis. I'm happy to hear the Robert for collaboration. I understand that you target students here. I wonder, have you thought about adapting or administering these kind of tests to other communities?
Yes, so we're actively working, piloting, doing it with teachers right now in the school group. For reasons I don't need to go too in depth with here, that poses questions about teachers, again, because of the formative nature of the assessment. We don't want it to be interpreted as a summative evaluation, and so, but nevertheless, we know teachers are the critical component in the classroom to cultivate the competencies and the educational experience for the students. So that's where we're naturally moving to next, is to think about how do we connect this with the teachers' levels.
And out of the school?
And sorry?
Out of the school.
Out of the school. So we are doing it lightly with, how do I say, third group educational partners. So like after school educational partners. Like the mentoring group I mentioned in Portugal, for example, that's not during the school day. So, but they're still educational. We haven't deeply explored doing it otherwise. Yeah.
Question on that. Yes. Thank you for the presentation. There's a lot of work done, and it was quite impressive. My question is about the competencies, because you mentioned, okay, 21st century skills. or competencies that are too complex, and my research also includes some competencies that are too complex. And you kind of create a sort of like sub-competencies to have this actionable steps so that you can measure like overall all these sub-competencies help you to measure just competencies like creativity or critical thinking. So I was wondering like how you come up with like these sub-competencies, like through your research for years that you said, okay, these sub-competencies, if we evaluate them, we could understand if they get more creative or critical thinking, or there are like some established frameworks for competencies and they were already there.
Yes, they were already established. So we're drawing from the Center for Curriculum Redesign and their four-dimensional model, where they, based on many years of research, had specified the competencies and then the sub-competencies. And so that's what we're drawing our model.
Okay,
Yeah.
and my other question, so you also mentioned that 12 competencies and they could be so much work for teachers. How did you decide embedding specific competencies in specific disciplines? So if it is art and creativity, mathematics, critical thinking, like how it was decided?
Yeah, so that was also then based on a different research study coming out of CCR. So not explicitly from our work, but that's to say, working with teachers and focus groups to think about where there might be natural overlaps of the competencies. So that's where that advice came from.
Existing research and also
Yeah.
field investigation.
Yeah, field investigation with teachers. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes, we have two online questions.
Was there any reflection being given schools to if and how the school could boost the 21st competencies as a way to contribute to better academic results?
So was there, sorry, one more time, did you say?
Was there any reflection being given to if or how the school could boost the 21st competencies as a way to contribute to a better academic result?
Yes. So yes, this I mentioned briefly our beginning transition about professional development, and this is essentially why we're making that transition a little bit. Is this demand from schools? This demand from schools. Okay, this is great. We appreciate the findings that our assessment provides, but we really want to start to make the change. And so, how do we make that change? So it's difficult because our partners are coming and starting from very different places and have very different resources. So I'm thinking about a school group who they're doing a whole redesign of their push-in, pull-out support in their classrooms, and how do they integrate their well-being team inside of their classrooms, doing that more thoroughly. We saw a larger school network use our results. They were using 3 different social emotional curriculums. And so they were doing, I can't go too much into the details for privacy reasons, but they used our evidence to make a decision about actually one of their curriculums was underperforming compared to their other curriculums. So they were moving their schools away from this curriculum towards their others where they saw consistent better results. So these are some of the ways in which that's happening, but yeah, it really depends on the school and their needs and what they can do. Yeah.
The second one.
Yeah.
In the proposal to embed the competencies into practice by dividing them across different classes, was there any identification of which methods or learning approaches would best support the development of soft competencies?
Yeah, so we don't have large scale empirical data to investigate this question at the moment of the learning approaches, which is we're only just now starting to work with school partners to collect data if they're willing to give us that information about what's actually going on in the class in terms of the learning approach. We know, back to the previous question, from the advice and the research done with the CCR, we know that project-based learning models, play-based models of education lend themselves better to teaching of the competencies. And so that's naturally some of the advice and some of the curricular pedagogical changes that we're encouraging in our work as well.
had a question.
Yes, I have two questions. The first was, can you access the results of the research? And
So can you access the research results? The research papers that are published are there for the academic community. Please use them if you can. I don't know exactly which results you're interested in. Obviously, we have to be, to the previous question, we have to be sensitive to student level data and who we can share student level data with. So that's less likely to be available. But otherwise, yes, the results are there. Contact me if you have a specific question and we can work on collaborating. And then your question about professional development was teacher training, you said. So, right, we are not a teacher. Are you thinking about ongoing professional development for teacher training or like with the university teacher training?
I'm thinking about how your results
Yeah.
and your conclusions could be used to improve
Yeah.
compass for future
Yeah.
teachers.
So we're not currently active in that space. So that's to say, I don't have a well thought out answer to that, but I believe wholeheartedly that it's related, and that's why we do the work. Is that I mean, we know that the competencies are important, and so yes, we need to also redesign and think through our teacher training programs as well. To also put more emphasis on this. Annalena and I were talking before this conversation that teachers are often the overlooked, both the best champions of this and you know the ones that are often forgotten in this conversation. So how do we recenter that as well? That's why we provide the school level reports, which provides breakdown of classroom grade levels inside the schools to try to start to get at that, to provide additional usable data that the teachers can use inside of their school. But we just frankly don't have the capacity to do too much more at that level, apart from what we're now trying to do with the professional development. Yeah.
One question from me. As I understand it, your assessment works for K-12 education.
No. So students need to have literacy in order to read and take it themselves. So 10 is really our minimum.
Okay,
Yeah.
but my question has to do with higher education. How
Yeah.
would this, what would need to be, how would you adapt this to higher education assessment?
We are already adapting it to higher education. I just don't have the empirical published data to come to you with. But we've worked with the university group in Brazil and a university group in Denmark that we're working with now. So it's forthcoming, but yes, we're already working on making those modifications and adaptations per scale at the university level.
But what are the parts that need to be adapted?
Yeah, so the calibration, so the age level calibration needs to be adopted. I've also made changes to the types of questions to introduce more, let's say, problem solving type questions that higher cognitive level or higher order thinking skills could answer. So yeah, appropriate for the university context. Those are the primary main changes, yeah, the calibrations and the types of questions.
And how would you embed these competencies in university level? So it again depends on what they study or they major.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer to that either. I can speak about our partners who, I mean, our main partner that we're working with, they are already actually working to integrate the 4D model in their school as it is in their university. So this is kind of a natural complement to what they're doing. It's difficult at the university level because most professors have a certain level of autonomy of each of their classes, right? So we don't want to double up students taking the assessment in multiple university classes. That doesn't make sense for us to do. but there's not that same general type of organization. So it is a logistical puzzle for us. In this case, we've had success when there is kind of a cohort university model, and then we're able to work at that level with the cohort. Yeah.
I have two questions myself. So to show not in science, because I would expect science, since this is often more project-based learning, more problem-solving approach. So I was really surprised that it was English and math. So I don't know, do you have an idea about that, why this was?
I do. So I think it's an artifact of this study. So this particular study. If you see here, science was the only subject where students decreased in their academic performance, so unrelated to the competencies. So we saw a decline in students' grades in the science. So I think it's an artifact of the grading, of how the teachers graded their students in science.
Okay.
Are these national tests? Or?
No, this is a school
It
level.
decreased during the activities they have, it decreased due to some other external reasons because not natural.
I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. So I think it's an artifact
Okay.
of this science teacher in that school.
So I actually think it's more in science that they actually develop these competencies.
Yeah,
than
yeah.
math, for example.
Yeah. So
Okay.
great observation. I have attuned listeners, which is great. I think it's an artifact of the study.
Okay,
Yeah.
and I have a second question. It's a bit about also the teachers, because we expect them to teach these competencies, but do you actually make also tests with them or this assessment that they have these competencies? Because should they not actually have them themselves first to then be able to teach them? I don't know how you control for that, maybe or not, or.
This is what I was alluding to with the previous question. We don't do that at the moment. Even though you're absolutely right, we know the teachers need the competencies, need to have a certain level of mastery of the competencies as a way of teaching them. Nevertheless, there is an element, the nature of these skills, that you can be a good teacher and not have the competency yourself. So maybe we could think about a therapist, right? You might have a therapist who's really good at helping you with your significant other, and they might have a disastrous rapport with their own partner, right? So in some ways, there is actually, you might have the ability to teach it and not have it mastered fully yourself. And actually, I want to use it as a point to emphasize our own theoretical framework, which is to say we believe very strongly that these competencies are relevant for all of us, not just students in schools or universities, but all of us and at all times of our life. And so what do I mean when I say that? It's to say that we never, like, it actually is very difficult to have mastery of the competencies in all parts of one's life. And that's actually both the opportunity and the challenge of 21st century competencies, which is to say they must be continuously readapted to new contexts and new situations in our lives. And so we don't expect everybody to have mastery of all the competencies all at the same time. Rather, like the compass, it's about navigating. When do I need high levels of critical thinking and creativity in my life? And when do I need high levels of resilience and growth mindset in my life? And actually training us to have the metacognition to move back and forth of when we need the certain competencies at high levels and when we don't need them at high levels, right? Yeah, that's a larger can of worms, but yeah.
No more questions. People-
No, but it was just a very small question because studies, they were also divergent. There was some
Yeah.
in different areas. Did you also have focus to provide more for the assessment of specific methodologies? Sorry, maybe I missed the beginning. Maybe you mentioned it, or you wanted and you mentioned these three publications that you wanted to do more study. It was it oriented towards applied application towards enhancement of projects or more?
If I understand, the question is, what is our approach to the methodology of the research? So,
And if you aim to, for example, change the methodology in order to test it for further.
yeah, so certainly I'm working and exploring how do we change it and adapt. I'll say just very transparently, one of the real limits of the research we have is we have a self-selection sample of partners who are working with us. So that poses some questions for me methodologically, right? This is not an RCT designed study of 21st century competencies, that's clear. And in fact, many of our educational partners are those already thinking about this, and that's why they come to us. We are working with some municipalities, so city municipalities in Spain and Brazil, who are implementing it with the population level sample in their schools, right? So we don't have the data yet for that, but does that answer your question?
More or less, yes.
Okay.
I wanted to more let's say reports and applications that you
Say that again?
applications that you
The applications of the tool. Yeah, that's a logistical challenge for us. I mean, we're happy to the earlier question about the implementation. We're quite proud that it's relatively non-invasive. So 2 points a year for let's say 45 minutes for the students and an hour for the teachers of training, that we can provide this type of intervention. When we start talking about change and the practical applications, now this requires a really large amount of investment of time and energy from the school partners. And so this is a dance that we're having of many schools, well, I won't say many schools. Some schools are really not open to further collaboration after the assessment. They have their approach and they don't want to be told what to do. And then others are much more interested in really going deeper and exploring that together. So we have to be responsive to the school partners. Yeah.
Question there? Yeah. So my question is maybe broader, not so much related to the topic and subjects of discussion, but looking at how the world is moving in terms of the age of AI and all of these things. Did you consider any components with regards to AI and how they can also have, AI can also have an influence on competencies and all of these things in students and even in the professional field?
Yeah. Annalena and I were also talking about this before. We're still exploring what is our link or connection to AI in terms of practically how are we using that in terms of our work. I'm exploring, well, in what ways could AI maybe be used to help provide more individualized recommendations for students based on their data of the competencies. That's a promising approach perhaps. But to your more theoretical point of the question, in many ways, actually, the conversations of AI, it's actually just providing deeper justification for the need of 21st century competencies, right? I don't remember if it was in one of these slides too here, but AI is actually in many ways replacing the hard skills. If we think about, I'm sorry, the measure of analyzing, remembering. Yes, Bloom's taxonomy. Thank you. So Bloom's taxonomy, if we look at this, AI can actually do most of it, if not all of it, right? And so that's actually to say, well, actually now we need to think about a different taxonomy of education, and Bloom and AI cannot do the 21st century competencies, right? It cannot be resilient. It cannot be courageous. And so actually it just provides a deeper justification and the need for what we're doing.
Okay, we'll let that be the
Can I still ask one question?
very short.
Oh,
Very short.
It's
very
directly
short.
related to what you
Okay,
just
very
said.
short.
But it's a question of curiosity. We don't have to develop it. I don't know if it doesn't work. But the OECD is doing a study on how the AI will be able to answer the PISA study questions. And they are using several methods. One of them is they're working with experts, a group of experts, to expert benchmark to assess the probability that AI will outperform students in the PISA test in all of the questions of the PISA test, and apparently they are anticipating that by 2026, AI will already outperform the students in all of them. So I was wondering if you are familiarized with this expert benchmark method and how precise, accurate, reliable it is in terms of anticipating and making these predictions.
Yeah. I don't know, it's been a few years since I worked at the OECD, so I don't know about this particular work. But what I can tell you is that when I was there, and I remain in contact with those working on their innovative domains at the OECD, so thinking about creativity as measures and those types of things. And so that's to say, they, being the OECD, is all, and I can't speak for them, they are already actively thinking about how do they reform and make changes to their assessment model in ways that are consistent with what we're saying. So they recently published a social emotional skills survey at the OECD, which totally aligns with our findings and what our theoretical approaches as well. With respect to PISA, yeah, I can't tell you in great depth about the expert benchmarking of PISA.
Okay, we'll let that be the last question.
Thank you, everybody.
The R&D Unplugged is on November 12th with our own Caroline on disability in students and the competency of students. I invite you all to be here. You hinted at something like that in one of your studies, so it's a continuation, sort of.
I'll also just add, for those in the room, I'm here roughly every other week, Tuesdays and Wednesdays in LPI. Our offices are on the second floor on this side of the building. So if you see me, grab me, let's have a coffee, let's chat, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.